Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. You see the face on this screen is quite familiar to you, should be quite familiar. And if he is not, he needs to be, and he will be after today. John Henry Weston is one of the co-founders of LifeSite News, and he is one of the two news sources that I follow every day religiously. We're going to learn a little bit more about him and why he so passionately does what he does, not just for getting us news, solid Catholic news, what's going on in the church and the world, but why he got into this field in the first place. So John Henry, God bless you, your efforts. I don't know what I would do without you, without LifeSite News. Welcome to the Breakfast with Bacon show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you and your listeners. God bless you.
What can I start with that? How did you start with LifeSite News? Did you wake up and say, I want to be a journalist and I want to start telling the truth and I want to be persecuted?
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of a long story. I'll try and shorten it. I was raised by a saint of a dad. Literally daily mass, daily rosary, thought to be extreme by everybody. Beautiful, holy guy, helped with everything, humble as anything. And I left it. I left the faith after being spoon-fed it. Baltimore Catechism, everything good and holy you can imagine. I left it in my early teens. I went away basically into atheism of a sort and hedonism and just totally abandoned Christ and his church. Came back in my early 20s and through getting trouble with the law when I was 18. I was actually driving, got in too many speeding tickets and proclaimed I was my friend instead of me. And of course that's fraud and just horrible stuff, but it threatened my future, which made me think again about turning around. Tried to do so for a bit, went even a year or two sort of fumbling around with, well, I can probably go to mass on Sunday mornings, and found I was still addicted to sin. And it was a horrible thing to recognize that, oh my gosh, it has control over me, not me over it. And it was then that I reread, or actually read the first time. My father had given it to me when I was 14 and I totally rejected it, but read True Devotion to Mary, St. Louis de Montfort's great work. And that is when I had a crisis of faith. It was actually the reading of the book that made me realize, oh my gosh, this means all day, every day. It's not like Sunday mornings for a Catholic Lucky Charm.
Right.
And I realized, me telling myself for the last, I don't know, 7 years or so, God doesn't exist. If anybody could prove to me Jesus was real, I'd believe like my dad. I know that's stupid, but nonetheless, that's what it was. But because it was all day, every day, I had to know if it was real, because if it was real, I'd actually do it. I'd go for it. I would embrace it. I would give my life to it. If it's not real, I don't want to do that. So I literally took True Devotion to Mary, the book, put it under my arm, and went to talk to my dad. I have, to this day, decades and decades later, the same speech in my head. Dad, I only know one thing in life, is that you love me because you put up with all of my stuff. I want you to tell me the truth. Because you love me, tell me the truth. Is this stuff for real? I read your book, True Devotion to Mary. It means giving up my whole life. I don't want to do that if it's not real. So tell me, because you love me, is this real? Couldn't ask my dad the question when I got to him. Because you know what? I don't think anything he could have said would have convinced me, because that's, how do you convince someone? But you know what did convince me? It was his life. It was particularly the persecution he received for living the faith every day, all day. His wife left him, partly because he was an extremist Catholic who prayed the rosary every day and went to mass every day, and that was his whole life. His kids all made fun of him. I remember coming home from dance clubs, 2 a.m, and he'd be there kneeling by his bedside, sometimes having fallen asleep and sort of sleeping on the bed while still kneeling, sometimes praying out in the backyard, at 2 and 3 a.m. I'd go out with a barbell, one of the bars from the dumbbell, to clobber whoever it was. We were living in downtown Toronto, and there was my dad kneeling at the grotto that he had set up outside. I remember him getting a haircut from my aunt once, and him whacking him when she got around to the front, because he was, of course, as he always was, mouthing prayers. And it was like, can't you ever stop? That persecution convinced me beyond any words that ever could have been issued that this was real. And for me, that was it. I don't believe in, instantaneous conversions are kind of weird, but it happened to me in a sense, in that I believed it and I was able to receive true devotion and practice it sort of from that time on. I went to daily mass and daily rosary nonstop from then. And that was, 1993. And it revolutionized my life. It was in 1995, after finishing an MA and having a great big scholarship to do a PhD in school and child clinical psychology, that I didn't feel called to go on. The reason being is I knew I could help people in psychology with good methods to get out of abnormalities, with coping mechanisms and so on, especially for young people, for children. But in the profession, particularly in Canada, I wasn't able to give them the fullness of the truth. And so I didn't feel God would go on.
Right.
I gave up a huge scholarship. And then in the summer of 1995, I was praying at a mass and knew St. Joseph would find me work. My wife at the time was Protestant, and was an odd thing because at the mass, there was some young lady in the aisle next to me there. She had a head covering on, and the priest introduced us and left. And I tried to make some small talk. She said to me, "We shouldn't talk here. We're in front of the Blessed Sacrament." So she promptly left the church. I turned around.
Wait, she said to you, we shouldn't talk to you because you're in front of the sacrament?
Yeah, we're in front of the Holy
Very
Eucharist. So yeah, I know.
So respectful though, right? She was being respectful?
Very much so.
Okay.
Young lady with a head covering on who was praying after mass, the only other one in the church. So I told the priest, I turned around and genuflected. I told her, "Lord, in the Blessed Sacrament, oh, so she's one of yours, eh?"
Nice Canadian.
Right away there was something there. Got outside to the steps of the church. That's when she said to me, "So, do you need a job?" It was very strange. I'm there praying for that reason. It's summer, so why would I be looking for a job in the summer anyway? I said to her, "No." She said, "Good, I have a job for you." It was so stark, it was so weird that I knew I was called. And it didn't matter what she said, I would have done it. So she said, the interim newspaper, Canada's pro-life newspaper, needs someone to sell the paper. And I was like, okay. I was totally game. She gave me some contact information and she'd be in touch. I gave her mine. It was great. I raced back to the place we were staying. We were with my in-laws. And I, with such enthusiasm, told my wife, "I told you St. Joseph would find me work." And I told her what it was that was going to sell the pro-life newspaper of Canada. Her response was not encouraging. It went something like, "So you mean to tell me you are giving up 7 years post-secondary and a scholarship to do your PhD to become a paper boy?" And I think my father-in-law concurred at the time that it was rather ludicrous. I was undeterred, however. For the next 2 weeks, I think I sold 2 subscriptions to the paper, one to my dad and one to our local parish. Went down for an interview with the head of the pro-life movement, the distribution manager for the paper first. She gave me some rules and regs for selling the paper and also selling ads in the paper. Great. They asked me then if I wanted to meet the head of the pro-life movement at the time, Jim Hughes. And I said, sure, I know him from TV. Great guy, hero of mine, sort of. So I went to meet him. Honestly, this was the interaction. I'm going up to him. He looks at me rather sternly. He's holding some papers. He throws the papers on the table in front of him and says, "What the hell is this?" Excuse my language, but those were his words. And I looked and it was my CV. At the time, my CV was only education. I mean, it was, I worked as a researcher, sure, as a researcher at the University of Toronto, at the University of Ottawa, a little bit at the University in Florence in Italy. But it was all academic research. It was all psychology. And there was academic awards, there was a scholarship. And his basic question was, and he picked up the papers again, and he said, "Are you for real?" And I was like, oh boy, this is
I
kind of weird.
think
And I said,
so.
look,
Maybe.
you don't know me, but you know my dad. My name is John Henry Weston. He is Henry Weston. Yes, he's a white guy with blue eyes, but I'm a mix. My mom's from India. My dad was Dutch German. So you do sort of know me. He's a supporter of yours. And that's when he completely changed. He thought I was a spy for Planned Parenthood, and probably rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't make sense that with my background, I was applying to sell the newspaper, but nonetheless, he told me that I couldn't sell the paper for them, but I could work for them. He had put me on research projects. Those research
So
projects
it's a
developed over
promotion
the next
before
2
you even
years.
started working, right?
Yeah. Those research projects turned into daily sort of newsish reports. And eventually, when he asked Steve Jeltsevac, his right-hand man at the time at Campaign Life Coalition in Toronto, to set up an internet, he said, we need an internet. He meant, of course, a website, but nonetheless, Steve set up a website, called it LifeSite, because he couldn't find another URL that was available. And someone else suggested, why don't you put John Henry's little news thing on the website? And that's what we did. That was September of 1997, and it was the birth of LifeSite News. So no grand plan, no real big orchestration to do anything. It really is work of the Lord that was sort of orchestrated by him. So if you want the answer to how did we end up here, this is where we ended up and how.
Wow, that's very engaging. I have to tell you, when you were talking about your dad, I had to hold back tears, though I don't usually hold back tears for the camera, but is your dad still alive?
No, he passed away a decade ago. And strangely, when I converted, I didn't really tell him the story. A couple of years before his death, I told him how and why. I know he knows now, but every time I hear stories of parents suffering and praying for their kids, as I do now with my own children, it's very moving for me, because that experience will always stay with me. I owe my dad my faith in a very, very real way.
God bless you. And I am with you. I have two daughters who have, I don't want to say walked away, but are paying no attention to their faith, although one is walking back, and 6 grandchildren. And I am currently trying so hard to convince the 16-year-old to get confirmed. And he's like, yeah, I don't need that. And that too, like right now, I hold back tears. It grieves me, because when I was 16, I don't know that I would have known the value of sacraments. I didn't know the value of sacraments like I do today. I never turned my back on God. I never had a defiant time. I, like you, just got into a point in my life where I was too busy for God, and I was sinning. But as a mother and as a grandmother, you're right. I think when God created humanity, and God could have done anything, he could have had in his plan that we'd all be born from eggs, or we'd all just spontaneously be created. But he made a conscious plan that each child should have a mother and a father, and that they should come together, because there will be no one on earth that will pray for a human more than his or her own parent. I'm not convinced that anyone else would pray as hard. And you're not a grandparent yet, I presume. You look too young.
Yeah.
It's equal. And that's why I do these shows, because you today, John Henry Weston, are part of my series on speaking the truth in a culture that's deaf. And sometimes it's our children and our grandchildren that are deaf. Sometimes they don't want to hear. Sometimes they just don't know, and they don't just have time or pay attention to it. But regardless, they are deaf. And I am so grateful that God brought you through what he brought you through, that you too are now fighting the good fight like your father, and that you saw. I mean, I love the idea that you and I can talk about persecution, because I mentioned that at the beginning, or probably before we went on the air. I don't remember. But we are in a time of very real persecution, in a time where we are expected to be white martyrs, and very many of us are likely, shocking to some people to hear me say this, going to be red martyrs. in America, in Canada. And for those of you that don't know, white martyr is someone who's just constantly being persecuted and kind of killed, while still living, martyred. But red martyrdom is, giving your head. And so I don't belittle anybody, but I just know that several people had asked me the difference between red and white martyrdom. So here we are in 2022, in two of the most developed and greatest nations in the earth, you in Canada, me in America. And yet the persecution is real. And I think it starts in our homes. And so your father showed you, you're showing your grandchildren. And now, because of LifeSite News and because of what you're doing, you get the privilege. Don't laugh at me. You get the privilege of being persecuted on a grander scale, right? I mean, every day you must have people tell you how radical you are and how different you are and how, and just try to shut you down. Am I correct on that? Is the persecution real? Do you see it? Do you pay attention to it?
Yeah, it's real. It got very, there's a lot of things I could say on that. I think most people know our main YouTube channel was shut down. It was growing by leaps and bounds very, very quickly. And it was shut down it was over 315,000 subscribers at the time. We were slowly building back, but it's nothing compared to what we were. Right. Also because of the massive shadow banning censorship that we undergo right now. The John Henry Weston Show channel, which somehow survived the ban, is just over 100,000 subscribers now. And we're on Rumble, we're on Band, but the audiences aren't the same. So were we hit? Yes, but there are also real threats of harm to our persons, to our families. That's one thing that's been rather more ugly when they threaten your children. But none of them have come to fruition in any way. But there's threats of lawsuit. We were sued once by a Catholic priest who was a homosexual and a politician in Canada, and he took us to court. That cost us, I think, in the neighborhood of $250,000 or $350,000 to. Hello, are you still there?
I am still here. You froze for a little bit.
For a second. Sorry.
Yeah. So it cost you about $250,000 to fight that.
Yeah, it did. And for us, actually, the main purpose was to bring him to repentance, to conversion, because having been on the other side, you honestly love everybody because yes, I was over there. That could have been me. Literally, there for the grace of God go I is true for me in everybody, no matter what dastardly thing they're doing, because I would have been willing to do anything at the time. So our want for Father Raymond Gravel, who was the priest in question, was that he convert, that he come to the faith and embrace Christ. And we would have felt it was a totally worth it investment if the $250,000 were spent in the court case, but he came to reconciliation with our Lord and his truth. Unfortunately, in the middle of the suit, he died. He was a young man. He died of cancer. And it came on suddenly. And the day before he died, he did a commercial for euthanasia. So we were most upset, not at the losing of $250,000, but that the bishops didn't voice enough concern to him to have him change his ways before he passed away. Perhaps there was something else on his deathbed that I don't know about. But that's sort of where we're coming from. So there's been persecution, yes, but I think there's so much grace amidst the persecution that we don't see it so much as persecutions. There's a lot of spiritual attack.
Yes.
And that's one thing that people should know when going into work for Life and Family. Remember what Our Lady said to Sister Lucy, who shared it with Cardinal Caffarra. And he revealed it at our 2017 Rome Life Forum conference, that, the final battle between our Lord and the reign of Satan will be over marriage and the family.
Yes.
And that anyone who works for marriage and the family will always be persecuted, but her Immaculate Heart triumphs. Yes. but it's a very real persecution, not only in terms of the world, but also spiritual. And so, we tell all the people who come to LifeSite before they get employed, this stuff
Be
is real,
prepared, right?
and you got to be prepared. Exactly. You got to keep up your prayer life, and this is no light thing.
Yeah. I am so, I think of what our mother said to Sister Lucia all the time, because I am in that business. I save marriages. My goal is to save 1 million marriages before I die. Of course, not I, but God through me. And I hold standards meetings, which my regular viewers probably know what that is. And you might even be thinking, what is a stander? Which is sad that we as Catholics should be the leaders. But standers are those people who are standing on their marriage vows while their spouse is having an affair or has divorced them or has children with another person. And these are people who are saying, I am married until the day I die or until one of us dies. They don't file for annulment. They carry that heavy, heavy cross. They are persecuted mercilessly. They are told, you're delusional. Your spouse will never come back to you. You deserve to be happy. Move on. And in the beginning, they support you, but towards the, middle and end, they're like, that person's crazy, kind of like your dad. And so to be in that profession, I face so much, including Catholic priests who are like, well, just tell so-and-so to get an annulment. I'm like, you're missing the whole concept of the Catholic Church. Anyway, so persecution comes in all of these areas. And I'm so grateful to be in this area of marriage and the family. But I don't think, John Henry, we have even experienced the beginning. I think it's going to be ramping up to a greater level. But before I go into persecution more, I want to say to our viewers, and kind of to you in question or response maybe, is that you and I are devout Catholics. We love the Catholic faith. We see the problems in the Catholic Church, and we would never leave the faith. So we don't want anyone to think that anything that we say on the show is like, oh my gosh, Catholic Church is so screwed up, get out, don't be persecuted. So I want to caveat, well, I know you agree with me. The Catholic Church is the church God made. We have the Eucharist. To whom shall we go, right? But one of the things you talk about are the difficulties that we're experiencing because of the head of the church. We're supposed to be bringing the church into the world. Yet right now, it seems that our Holy Father is allowing us to bring the world into the church. That's pretty difficult. Can you speak to that?
It is one of the most difficult things that we face in the world today. And I truly believe, too, that we're up against persecution in a major way. There might even be a world war in the very near future. Nonetheless, I would say that the most severe thing going on in the world right now is Pope Francis. We pray at LifeSite in imitation of Bishop Athanasius Schneider every day for the conversion of the Pope. And what is going on, I presume most of your viewers probably know, but it's been one of the most radical, not one of the most, I'm sorry, that's erroneous. The most radical papacy in all history. It is one full of heresy. And one particular issue which has, and it was a brilliant insight from Dr. Mike Hickson, one of LifeSite's premier writers. She traces how Francis, from the beginning, has had an issue with Holy Communion. Do you remember right from the outset, it was about Holy Communion for divorced and remarried? From there, it went to meetings where he encouraged Protestants, non-Catholics, to just, if they feel unconscious, to go forward and receive Holy Communion. Then came the whole nonsense with pro-abortion Catholic politicians receiving Holy Communion, inviting Nancy Pelosi to the Vatican, having her there, having her receive Holy Communion after meeting with Pope Francis at a papal mass. And then the whole issue of Catholics who are homosexual, who are living homosexual lifestyles, receiving Holy Communion, encouraging Father James Martin in his so-called ministry, LGBT ministry, which is horrific.
Hiring
They're
him.
leading people into sacrilege.
Hiring him as the communication director. Putting
Absolutely.
him in an
First
intentional
of all, asking him to
position.
speak at the World Meeting of Families, a Vatican event, then making him onto the Pontifical Council for Social Communications, then meeting with him in person, from which Martin used it to promote what he was doing with regard to the LGBT monstrosity in the church. but then answering dubia or questions from Father Martin's LGBT group when Francis refused to answer the questions of the 4 dubia cardinals.
Right.
He met with him personally when he refused to meet with Cardinal Zen, who came from Hong Kong to meet with him about the plight of Chinese Catholics under the Sino-Vatican Agreement. It's unreal. You could go on and on and on. So there is, but in that one trajectory, you can see from the beginning of his papacy till now, a sort of linchpin, as Dr. Hickson called it, of his whole papacy. And that is the issue with Holy Communion. We just saw that he made his remarks again to the great scandal of all Catholics in Kazakhstan about all religions being willed by God, which he did first with the Abu Dhabi statement. Bishop Schneider reacted to it. And just this week, Bishop Schneider, along with Tyler Bishop Joseph Strickland, who is a great hero, not only for the United States, actually, but for all of the world, along with Bishop Mustarts from the Netherlands, as well as Bishop Rene Henry Gracida, who's formerly a retired bishop from Texas. They all put out this statement. And I think it's the most important statement that's ever been issued with regard to Pope Francis, because it calls out his recent document pertaining to Holy Communion called Desiderio Desiravi for heresy. It contradicts verbatim what the Council of Trent called heresy, in that Trent says, and I'm giving you a paraphrase because I don't remember exactly the wording, but Trent says that it is that anyone who would say that faith alone is sufficient preparation for the most holy sacrament of the Eucharist or for Holy Communion, let him be anathema, which means excommunicated. And inside the document, the apostolic letter issued on June 29th of this year that Pope Francis released, Desiderio Desideravi, he says that the only thing that's necessary for the wedding feast of the Lamb, he's talking about Holy Communion, is the virtue of faith, and that comes from the hearing of the word. Again, paraphrase, but you can find almost exactly that there. So it is heresy. It's not the first heresy, but again, it's heresy in an official document, an official apostolic letter. The bishops go on to say that Catholics may not obey Pope Francis in this, what he says, because it is not infallible. The Council of Trent is infallible on this matter of Holy Communion, the preparation for Holy Communion. But also they call on bishops and priests of the world to maintain to the true teaching of the Church with regard to the worthy reception of Holy Communion, which we know exists right from the beginning of the Church. So monumental things in the Church, but Christ has called some of his shepherds to finally speak out in a way that's very clear.
Yes.
Because we needed it so badly.
Yeah, I have been thinking, I've had Father Altman on the show frequently, and he says, good guys, bad guys, right? Well, we're talking about the hierarchy. And I said, well, I think there's a third group. I think there's the absolute bad guys who may potentially not repent, as God breaks God's heart, but let's hope they do. Then there's the good guys, the very few that you see, the 4 that you just mentioned, right? I think the third group is a group who wants to do what's right, but they still, and I hesitate to use the word cowardly, but who right now don't have as strong a faith as to know what to do. So my hope is that there's a group of quiet people mobilizing and at when the time comes, because right now, John Henry, we are seeing there's no more fence sitting allowed. Sheep or goats. And so I think many have jumped left and many have jumped right. And I don't just mean that politically.
Yeah.
But I think there's a group that are still on the fence that are getting ready to jump. And I pray all the time that those are good men in the hierarchy who jump to the right side, metaphorically and church speaking, because we need them. And knowing full well that they and we who support them are very much lining ourselves up to get our heads chopped off. Metaphorically, potentially, literally as well. But we
Yeah,
need those men. And
I
if not now, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And we must pray for those bishops. We need them. But can you go a little bit deeper into, so this document that they were saying, is that telling us, the laity, not only don't listen to, so I just want clarification, don't listen to the Pope in this document, because this document is not infallible. So go
Mhm.
with what the church is teaching instead.
Right.
Did I get that right?
You did. In fact, in the Catechism of the Council of Trent, it says it perfectly, in that anyone who says that faith alone is sufficient preparation for receiving Holy Communion, let him be anathema. And that's almost exactly what the Pope
The
said
opposite.
here. And it fits along with his agenda, which we mentioned from the beginning: communion for divorced or remarried, communion for Protestants, communion for pro-abortion politicians, communion for people living an LGBT lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. So it's followed the trajectory of his papacy, and it's also heresy. It's apart from all the other heresies, but it's the first time that Pope Francis's teaching document have been named as such by a group of bishops. So very significant indeed, and very necessary. All those bishops that you were talking about, those who are probably good and kind of holding back, I call them the sort of go along to get along crowd.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of people in this category, a lot of bishops in this category. The number one excuse is this: hey, if I speak out now, I am going to be trashed, and they're going to put someone in here who's just going to devastate my flock. Unfortunately, that's almost exactly the same rationale that was used by Germans in Nazi times, who intended to do the right thing and wanted to, they said, gosh, I better just do what I need to do, because if I'm not doing this, imagine who they're going to put in. They're going to be brutal. I'll just be a little bit
compromise.
whatever. And that's where a lot of bishops are. And a lot of bishops have done a lot of compromising. And I guess one of the things that they don't understand is, by harming the faith, you are costing souls.
Yes.
And yes, it might mean putting your head on a platter. It's figurative right now. Yes, they might lose their bishopric. They might lose their permissions to say mass or whatever. But what they're doing otherwise is putting our children's souls at risk.
And
that's
their
very
own.
real, and they're going to be held accountable for that. Absolutely.
Look at that priest you talked about that sued you, who died unrepentant. The priest, a priest who just left my parish, he was our pastor, and he was so well loved. In many ways, we look at him as a conservative who really, I call him in that same category, on the fence. And we have someone at my church who is a very formidable personality. She was very high ranking in the military as a surgeon. I don't want to say what kind of surgeon, because it would absolutely single out who I'm talking about. But she lives in what she calls a marriage with another woman. And the priest at our church allows her to lector, allows her to be active in the church, and allowed the funeral of one of the family members of her pretend wife to be buried at the church and to be called family. And before he left, I had a private conversation with him. I said, how could you do that? And he said, well, I don't agree with it, but this particular person, and he's correct, would have gone straight to the bishop. And I talked with you before we went on the air how my bishop is allowing in James Martin, but sending emails out saying, don't allow Father Altman to come into this conference that I'm sponsoring October 8th at the Virginia Beach Convention Center. Please be there, disrupting the culture with truth. He won't allow that. So my pastor said, yeah, they would have just kicked me out of the church. And I did say, I said, but don't you worry about your soul. What about the people who are watching you allow this person? What you just said, John Henry, that the persecution. So if you'd have been kicked out, but people would have watched and said, why was a good man kicked out of his parish? Because he stood for truth. What a legacy. So I think we've got to, you and I and the laity, like Fulton Sheen said, we have to raise up and say, you and I, and people watching us, we want to see courageous priests. We will support you, even if they laicize you, which is the hugest white martyrdom, I believe, that a priest could experience. So do you agree that that would mobilize more of a population to stand on truth and let people watch you get persecuted or receive that white martyrdom? Am I correct on that?
I think so, definitely. We need to inform them. I think there are some sort of escape hatches. I know a lot of priests who have been sort of banned by their bishops, canceled, if you will. They've sought to go into the SSPX and then continue their ministry there. Those are options for them. I mean, if it works for them, but they only do the Latin Mass, so that might be somewhat difficult for a lot of them. These are hard times, very hard questions. And what to do with it all is extremely difficult. The reason why I even mentioned that is because, Bishop Schneider was the official visitator for the Vatican to the SSPX. And he's the one who came back and said, they're just Catholics. Catholics have permission to go to those masses. Catholics have permission to use that as their Sunday parish, to donate to them even. And now, since Pope Francis, miraculously, we can go for sacraments of marriage and of confession. So whatever it is, God has opened up a kind of escape hatch here through Pope Francis, which is so bizarre, but nonetheless, there it is. And so we do have to prep in some real ways, because we've already seen the Mass be shut down. I can't imagine that that's not coming back again, because, well, they've seen they can do it once, the powers that be, the elites, if you will, who really do fight the church. And once you see that works, it's very tempting to do it again. It's exactly like the lockdowns gave the governments massive power of the people, a kind of unbelievable control of the people. And they're going to want to do that again. So there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see that happen again. I'd like to be better prepared this time with priests where I can access the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass without interruption.
Yeah, I think about this mass psychosis that's taking place. You have a family member, your family's from Germany, my husband's family's from Germany. And I think about, and I say to people all the time, what do you think of the Germans who allowed their Jewish neighbors to be killed? They were normal people like you and me. They had senses of humor. They went to work. They feared God. They went to mass. And they did what they did. This idea that, take me to your leader, can't happen to us is ludicrous, because that is an arrogant perspective to think, we know better. And that's part of what we're looking at too. I think it is a grace from God that what happened, John Henry, in Germany was only a mere century ago, less than a century ago. It is still in our collective memory. So that now that this kind of craziness is happening again, at least we can keep though, as the Bible says, let he who has eyes see. Those of us who wish to see, those of us who have ears and are trying to hear, we can look at it and go, yeah, I need to keep my eyes open. I need to make sure I'm prayed up. I have the spiritual armor on. I receive the sacraments, because I don't want to end up like, people who were just, they fell for it. They fell for what the government was doing. And as you said, the government's getting ready to the world government. Not anyway, we could keep going in there. I want to ask you one more kind of little similar question, but a little trajectory change before I start wrapping this up. As a journalist, you don't speak too much in opinions when you write something. So I'm looking more for like factual things. We recently saw that Pope Francis and Nancy Pelosi had that secret handshake, which has been shown to also be a handshake of Freemasons. We also know from documentations from the Freemasons that they are trying to get a pope at the top. We also know that from Bella Dodd that communism absolutely did infiltrate the Catholic Church. She was responsible for 1,100 infiltrators. And in 1947, I think when she testified, there were already 4 in the Vatican. So this isn't subjective ideas. This is an absolute. You can find congressional proof. As a matter of fact, I recently heard on YouTube, well, within a year, Belladod's testimony, the audio file was still there. I don't know if it's still there today. So all of this to say, we know these things are factually supposed to take place. Do we have any research that's pointing towards the fact that Pope Francis is in fact a Freemason, or is that still subjective based on what information we know?
So as far as I know, that's still subjective. However, even the Masonic plan for the papacy wasn't so much to have a Freemason be on top of the church, be Pope. It was, if you remember the slogan on the flags that Saint Maximilian Kolbe saw, which is why he formed the Militia Immaculata, the celebration of the Freemasons in Rome, the flags or banners they were carrying is about Satan, that the Pope would be his slave. And the plan of the Freemasons vis-a-vis the Pope was not so much for him to be a Freemason as to have all of the Freemasonic ideals, because Freemasonry is largely misunderstood as to what it is and its aims. A lot of people think, oh, it's a society of wealthier people that get together to try and do good things.
Right.
When it's about destroying the Catholic Church, it's about a sort of unification of all religions, where we put out a series on LifeSite about Freemasonry. We're about 4 articles in. We're working on going through the most important books that have been written about the subject. I did a show about it recently, but it really is something to understand, because they had a plan to get rid of the Catholic Church, but also to distort it from within. And by all appreciable signs, they seem to have achieved that objective, because this Pope does seem to have the Freemasonic ideals as his own, rather than the promotion of the one true Catholic Church. And that probably that phrasing I used on purpose, because the one true Catholic and Apostolic Church is big part of his agenda, is to make the church sort of one of a group. God willed all religions, which he just said in Kazakhstan again after the Abu Dhabi statement. And it is, again, a heresy. It is something that is completely the opposite of the truth. And so here's what we have. Here's the Masonic plan being sort of played out. And they seem to have had the success they were looking for, at least vis-a-vis the Pope.
Well, we could talk about this forever. I'm just so grateful. I guess I'll have to just keep reading the articles that LifeSite puts out and watch your videos. And if I can really get you in here again, I'd love to talk again, because what you've brought is so rich. And I'm going to pray with my husband tonight when we do our prayers for you as a journalist, for you as the founder of LifeSite, for you as a husband and father, that the Lord continues to funnel through you truth and protect you, so that you can get out as much as he wills you to get out before your martyrdom comes, white or red, because God is using you so tremendously. And I am so grateful for what he's used you for, because you have fueled me by being obedient to your vocation. So maybe I can get you to promise on air to come on again, so that I have video proof of that.
I'd be very, very happy to.
Excellent. We'll get a good time.
Thank you for the prayers. We need them very badly.
Well, I know that. And so we'll send them. So 2 things I always end my show with. First thing is, name one thing you'd have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today. I always have to give people marching orders. One thing.
Oh, wow. Read True Devotion to Mary, and ask our Lord if that can't be your devotion. It's meant my life to me. And I would encourage them in anything. It would be that. Embrace it. I think for these times, it's actually necessary. John Paul II said of that devotion, it's indispensable to anyone who wants to give themselves fully to the work of Christ and redemption. We're all called to do that. Therefore, it's indispensable.
All right. Well, I'm going to get the book, and hopefully I can get through it with all the books I read of my guests. That's my biggest issue. I want to read these
It's only 100
books.
pages. It's the
really?
greatest treatise. It's the greatest treatise that the church has on Our Lady. And, some of them are like bigger than that. But this one's really short. But I think it's given as a special grace to read. So pray for the grace to read it, and it will change your life.
I shall. I shall. Last thing that I ask. It's a fill in the blank. John Henry, when I die, I will know my life has been a success
If I've maintained fidelity to our Lord, that's all I can say.
Yeah. Get to heaven. Here I am. Right. Oh, God bless you. I usually tell everybody how to find you, but I think most people watching know to go to lifesitenews.com. Is there anything specific about any other website, any other way that you want to market LifeSite News that we can tell them right now, go to, or just lifesitenews.com and they're going to find what?
There's a few things there. One, lifesitenews.com is all the news. There's sections there. If you're US, Canada, or Catholic, there's different sections. Also, all of our video offerings are right there. Go to video and you'll see them all. In addition, you probably don't know this, or many people don't. We have Life Petitions, a petition platform, which leads people to do great things for people en masse. Also, we have a GoFundMe alternative called Life Funder. If you, for instance, can't support your parish anymore because it's too woke to use the current terminology, you can find good places to give money to, which are totally faithful. That's at lifefunder.com. That's how we started the funding of the canceled priests through Father Altman. So all sorts of great things there as well. Lots of offerings at LifeSite. Please avail yourself of it. It's for the culture war. It's for you to be able to change the culture.
Thank God. That's fantastic. So I am actually one of those people who stopped giving to my church. We give 10%. And so I've had to pray hard on where do I send that money, and been sending it to good and holy priests over in Uganda. I've been sending it to other organizations, but that has been a challenge. It has grieved me greatly because I love our mother church. So thank you for doing the research there so that we can trust what LifeSite has done to vet those people, organizations. So you heard John Henry. Go ahead and look at the Life Funder under the lifesitenews.com website. Did I say that right? Lifesitenews.com or lifesite.com?
Yep, lifesitenews.com.
Excellent. Well, for all the rest of you, just want to make sure I push my website, breakfastwithbacon.com. No one remembers my name, but they always remember that Breakfast with Bacon lady. God was very gracious to have me marry my slice of bacon. And when you go to that website, you will see this show. You will see all the shows that I have done with these amazing guests God has given me, and some topics that touch what you aren't going to hear on mainstream media. So go ahead, and I'd be honored if you'd subscribe. I will say the same thing about John Henry's LifeSite as well as mine. You can no longer afford to be a passive recipient of news. You must go and subscribe to those places that you trust, because very soon we will all be shut down. They will shut us down through these social media platforms. They will shut us down in every place they can. And eventually they're going to hope to get to our emails and shut that down as well. But you need to go after those people that you trust and that you respect, and see what the news is yourself. Be that soldier of Christ. The one more last website, truthspeakers.org. Our conference is coming up October 8th in Virginia Beach. We are having Father James Altman as our keynote speaker. Abby Johnson will be there. We will also have Jesse Romero. And I'm trying to think, Zachary King, a former satanic high wizard who took part in 147 ritual abortions before he was converted by being handed a miraculous medal. Tremendous stories. And of course, I'll be there as well. So I'd love to meet all of you. Truthspeakers.org. We have been censored, so the word isn't getting out unless you pass the word by mouth. So I think I've done enough marketing here. I hate the marketing part, but go ahead and, one more thing, go to my website if you want to learn how to stand for your marriage. If you have a friend who's been devastated because his or her spouse has left, send them to breakfastwithbacon.com. And we have a community of people that now represent 40 states and 9 countries who come together to stand for marriages together and encourage one another. You are not delusional. You are not wrong. You are being persecuted, but by the grace of God, you will be rewarded for that persecution. So I have to go off the air. John Henry, you have been an amazing guest. I am so looking forward to the next time that I have you on the Breakfast with Bacon show. I'm going to see if you remember how I go off the air. If you do, sit with me. If you don't, it's okay. But I am Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life
On the sunny side.
yeah, sunny side up.